as we finish up the month and head towards what we hope is a better month of May. We'll do some stuff on the Bulls in just a couple of minutes. We'll hit the fan at 6. A couple things in sports today. Number one, for a lot of us and a lot of people who plan their summers around it, they didn't want to hear this message today. I think they expected it, but they didn't want to hear it. The governor stating today that he did not see any way that Saratoga could have fans in attendance this year. Saratoga brings over 1 million people to the racetrack for the summer month, or for the month and a half if you count July. Crowds can be upwards of 60,000 people at the track. That's jammed in at that place. It's one of the great scenes in American sport. It's one of the great venues in the world. It's one of the most beautiful venues in the world. In this day and time where we don't have any answers yet, I don't see how any sport's coming back. So I didn't know how Saratoga was going to come back either. Now the question remains, does Saratoga race with no fans, where you would just have the horses, and that's over 2,000 horses in town, because horses come and go and ship in, ship out for different races. The grooms and trainers and people who are needed on the backstretch workers, and everybody that is needed, and veterinarians and everybody that would be there that need to do that, plus the people you need to put on the races who would work for the NYRA. Is that still a possibility? It is. NYRA would prefer that because they would have a much higher handle. Saratoga pretty much pays for the whole NYRA year. They lose money at Aqueduct, which is a long winter. They make a little money at Belmont because you have the big Belmont Stakes, of course, and everything else. They make a lot of money at Saratoga. Saratoga is a festival. It's a world-class venue, a world-class vacation spot, and has a classic track built around it. Okay, and a huge amount of high-stakes racing, and then the sales and everything else. The sales have already been called off. We all now know we're not going to Saratoga this year. The second best thing would be if we were able to wager on it from wherever we now spend our summer. Also, we would like to race in Saratoga. Those of us that have horses, and I have 7 with partners. All of them with my partner from Casamigos Tequila, Lee Einslater. Rick Pitino is a partner of ours on a couple of horses. We have 7 horses among the 3 of us. Lee and I have 5, and we have 2 others that we co-own with Pitino too. Lee has a couple on his own. I, right now, am not currently racing anything on my own I only have the ones left. I had a couple on my own, including Mongo Nation, who's gone now. And I had a couple of other babies. They're gone now. So I just have the horses with Lee right now. So as of right now, we don't know if Saratoga is going to run at all. That's for the horses. We do know there's going to be no Saratoga racing for fans, and there's going to be an enormous hit for that town. The Saratoga town takes in about $20 million in revenue just for the Saratoga 6 weeks, or 8 weeks, whatever you want to call it. Really 6 heavy weeks, 8 weeks overall now, the last year. 8 weeks over, 6 weeks that are serious. It's just another blow in what has been a year where everything gets canceled. There's nothing you can do. This year's going to be that way. The market's up again today because Remdesivir, the Gilead drug, got a positive test, got a little nod from Fauci. They'll go forward now to see what works with it. So it put Gilead up. It also put the market up. Also, Google had a good earnings, so the market took off in hopes that everything is opening soon. We'll see. I think the economy is much worse than the market is, but that's the way it is. The Fed backstopped the market and all the other credit markets, the bond market and the real estate market and all the different markets. They made sure they backstopped all the markets and provided liquidity by putting about $4 trillion in. That's why the markets are what they are. The economy is in much worse shape than that. It's going to take the economy years to come back. Look at sports as an example. The other thing before I get to the Bulls stuff with an old guy, the best guy who covered the Bulls, and I'll get to him in a minute. I've seen it in a couple of places, and you heard it yesterday from my guest, John Orand, about the business of sports, about the draft did great on TV, the Jordan documentary did great on TV. That should not come as any surprise. Anything you put on TV right now would do well. Netflix is having crazy numbers every night. Roku and Hulu, they're all doing big numbers. Everything that's on TV is being watched. If you put a first-run movie on TV tonight, the number would blow your doors off. Yes, the Jordan thing did well. That's because you're giving somebody something in sports. They haven't had anything in 2 months. Whatever you would give them right now, they would jump at. This is a captive audience. This is an audience that's been in the house for 2 months. So, yes, it's doing well. That should not be an indication that anything for sports has changed in any way. Sports is going to do great. It's always going to do great as a TV product. It is live, unscripted. In a time when content is king, it is live, unscripted content, and nothing else is except the news. Sports, the NFL is going to make a fortune. They're going to double their TV ratings. And eventually the games will all come back everywhere. It may take a while. Teams are going to get hit in the short run because there's not going to be any fans in the stands. We're not going to have fans in the stands until we have drugs that work. Drugs that really work. We're not going to have New York completely open until we have drugs that really work. Explain to me how the greatest city in the world, but also a city where there is no such thing as social distancing possible, how's it going to open? You can't get the people there. You can't get down the street. You can't get into an office building. You can't go into a restaurant. And people who talk about restaurants opening with 50% capacity don't know anything about the restaurant business. Nobody's opening an expensive restaurant in a high rent area and putting 50% of the people in the building. They can't make any money that way. Come on. So some things are going to be very slow to come back. Very slow. Boeing said this morning they don't think the airline industry will come back for 5 years. Hotels are saying the same thing. Vacation properties are saying the same thing. Guys who run vacation sites are saying the same thing. It's going to take a while. Now, let me tell you about, I thought of having this guy on. You know, there's been so much talk about the Bulls and everything. When you did a show, a top sports show, back in the age of the Bulls, you had to do the Bulls. The Bulls were that big. They were like the Beatles. And we had the biggest show, which was Mike and the Mad Dog. We obviously did a lot of Bulls stuff, went to a lot of the Bulls games, a lot of Bulls Knicks, a lot of Bulls finals, whenever the Bulls came to town. And the guy I thought who covered the Bulls better than anybody was Sam Smith. That was our guy. That was the only guy we used. That was the guy that we went to, was on our show a million times. So I said, let me track down Sam Smith because that's the guy. He knew the Bulls better than anybody. And he was our go-to guy in their halcyon days and in the halcyon days of Mike and the Mad Dog. When the Bulls were the biggest and Mike and the Mad Dog was the biggest, the guy who came on our show to talk about it was Sam Smith. That was it. He was the guy. So as I thought and watched this, I said, you know what? As everyone talks about this, let me give you the guy who was the best, who covered this team and knew this team, I think, better than anybody. He knew what was going on. He knew what was going on inside the team. He knew what was going on with Michael. He knew what was going on with Krause. He knew what was going on with Pippen, with Kukoc, with Jackson, you name it. He had the whole thing. So that's the guy. And so I was thinking the last couple of days, you know what? If we're going to talk Bulls one of these days, you want to put Sam on. So that's what we'll do. So when we come back, we'll be joined by the guy who I think covered them and was as good a source on what the Bulls were about in their great glory days than anybody. Nobody was closer to the team. Nobody had a better sense. Nobody was more the go-to guy than Sam Smith was. And we'll get to him right after this. In the years of the Bulls, the Mike and the Mad Dog Show did a lot of stuff on the Bulls because everybody did. Whenever they came to New York, whenever it was Knicks and Bulls series, whenever the Bulls were in the playoffs, whenever they were in the finals. And the Mike and the Mad Dog Show used one guy and one guy only for the Bulls, the guy who was the go-to guy for the Bulls. So as all this stuff is being relived now, I said, the guy I got to get on the show is Sam Smith because nobody knew the Bulls better than Sam Smith. They can all say they did, and everyone probably acts like they do now. But I'm telling you, folks, having lived through it, the guy who knew the Bulls better than anybody was Sam Smith. Sam, welcome. How are you?
I'm good. Yeah, good to talk to you. I remember all those courtside interviews.
Absolutely, you were our guy. We only used you for everything, and I mean, we exhausted you. We had you on our show so many times. So
I had to be there to defend Phil Jackson against Pat Riley all the time.
First of all, how long did you know, Sam, that this thing was in the makings, or had you heard rumblings? What do you know about the documentary?
I really didn't. You know, we knew. I remember the film crew from NBA Entertainment being around that season and embedded. And then we'd always heard that because I remember one time somebody had asked about all their footage they had gotten because they were sort of wallpaper after a while. They were just kind of hanging around. Adam Silver, nobody we didn't know who he was at the time. He was NBA Entertainment, and somebody wondered whatever happened to all that, and they said, well, Michael never gave him permission to use it. I got to sign off on that stuff. So, and with Michael's reclusiveness over these last almost 20 years, I really thought that was it. He had signed out and moved, got his new family in Florida, built his golf course, and we'd see him a couple of times. We'd go to Charlotte. I saw him a year or two ago, and made some small talk, but I was surprised, frankly, that he sat for this. He certainly doesn't need the money.
Nope.
So, yeah,
What do you think? Do you think there's some ulterior financial motive here for something, or somebody got to him to get him to agree to this?
No, there might be an element. The only thing I could think, I know there's some notion of, he's jealous of LeBron, and they're saying, LeBron's the greatest, and
right.
He's needs to. I don't know so much about that. Maybe, I think it goes back a little bit to the Hall of Fame speech. Michael, kind of loves settling scores.
Yeah, he does. Yeah, he does. Yes, as he did the other night with Isaiah.
I'm coming up next.
Yeah.
With the Jordan rules after Isaiah and Krause and that famous Hall of Fame speech, which I remember, being there for it, and everybody said was sort of horrified. Oh, after all these, and I said, no, that's him. That's the guy. That's the guy we knew, and that's the fun part of it, where he's tears off the Band-Aid, and he doesn't care what anybody thinks. And so, it seems to be like an element of that. More like he's so comfortable. Somebody mentioned it to him, and he said, "You know what? What the hell? Yeah, go ahead."
It's funny, and we're talking with Sam Smith, who I tell you, folks, was the guy. He knew he was the best go-to guy for the Bulls more than anybody. Anybody, anywhere. I don't care what anybody says. He was around it. He had better sources. He was more involved than anybody. And I've told people when I've heard about this, and people would ask me about it, what do you remember about this and what do you remember about Jordan, this. I'd say, listen, first of all you don't realize is Jordan's an SOB. He's not a nice guy. I mean, he's just, he is what he is. He's a fiercely competitive, take no prisoners. He doesn't care what he says. That's it. That's Jordan. I said, I don't know how much of that's going to be depicted in this, but, I think you've seen at least in the Isaiah stuff or, different things, you see where it shines through that's what Jordan was. He was a tough cookie.
Yes, it's interesting. Yeah, you're right. You're exactly right. And it's what he evolved to because of the frustrations, and some of which they did mention. And I think they've done a really good job and asked a lot of the right questions too. He really resented Magic because they were comparing him. And he said even in the show how much he hated that.
Right.
They were saying, well, Bird's a winner, Magic's a winner, and you remember too from that era. The notion was hey, you can't win with this guy.
Right, he was a scorer. He was a
Scores all the
scorer.
time.
Right, yeah.
Like he's like a George Gervin with a good smile.
Right, didn't make
stuff.
anybody better. That kind of thing.
Right,
Right.
and that was the narrative, even in Chicago.
Yep.
And so what developed, in his frustration about, the famous always line was, well, Michael would say, would you tell me? He said, yeah, Bird, he's making guys better. Well, he's making McHale and Parrish better.
Right, Hall of Famers better.
Right.
Worthy and Jabbar.
Kareem and Worthy. He said, I got, Sam Vincent and Charles Davis. What are you talking about?
Yeah, people didn't understand. I mean, Bird's got 5 Hall of Famers, and so does Magic. And they learned, and they learned. But I thought they did a really good job. There's 2 things that I thought of, Sam, and you could tell me whether I'm wrong or not. I thought with Isaiah, a big part of it was an incident at the All-Star game that I remember where Isaiah treated Jordan really badly at an All-Star game, like kicked the ball down the other end of the court or something in Jordan's first All-Star game, and that started it or something. That's something that stuck in my head. I don't know if that's true or not. That just stuck.
Well, yeah, there was an element, and that's what they called the freeze out, supposedly.
Right. Yeah.
And it really didn't happen because supposedly 2 of the 3 involved in it were Magic and Gervin, who were on the other team.
Right.
So they couldn't. So the notion was, those players, what it was Jordan showed up wearing a lot of the Nike stuff, and his marketing thing separated him from everybody. But there was a lot of bitterness among the other All-Stars where, it wasn't so much he's wearing a Nike garb instead of, the league, was during a practice, but they didn't have all these endorsements. Here's this guy's 1-0. He's a rookie, basically, and he's got more endorsements than Magic and Bird. And so, Bird couldn't care less. Give him a 6-pack of beer. That's enough endorsements for him. But, Magic was mad about that. And Isaiah and Magic had the same agent. So afterwards, the agent, because Magic and Isaiah are complaining to the agent about why we don't have what this kid's got. The agent says, comes up with this thing about how they froze him out because Michael had like 7 points, which is basically what Bird scored in his first All-Star game. It wasn't unusual.
Right.
Anyway, so this narrative came, Isaiah froze him out. The very next game in Chicago after the break is the Pistons. Now, Michael's read about this in the paper, that there was this conspiracy against him. So he's like in a fury about this, scores like 49 points in the game, has this, and taunting Isaiah. And from that point on, the rivalry as the Pistons-Bulls thing got. But that kicked off that whole thing, and Isaiah being a Chicago guy. Isaiah resented Michael for now being the hero of his city. So all these elements came together. But, yeah, that first All-Star game sort of motivated Michael's feud.
We're talking with Sam Smith, who, as I said, in the Bull years, covered the team and was the guy, go-to guy. We had him he did interviews with Dog and myself, I'm telling you, 100 times, if not 200 times during those years, because we were around that team forever. I mean, we used to love to go to Chicago for the finals. If the Knicks didn't make it, and they didn't, we would go anyway, and we went to the finals every year, and we loved that stuff. I tell people how great that Madhouse on Madison was. It was unbelievable. I mean, with that, used to go downstairs to eat in that crummy little place downstairs, right? I mean, but it was such a loud, great. They tell me it was louder, Sam, for the Blackhawks. I never was there for a hockey game, but I'll tell you, if it was louder for the only other place that I've ever been in the league that was as loud was I was in Portland in the old days, in the old place that was 12,000, and that
the old Rose Garden.
And they played the Lakers in a playoff series, and I was working for CBS with Brent, and I'm telling you, you couldn't even hear the truck through the headset. It was so loud. That's the only other building I was ever in that was that loud as it was in Chicago.
Yeah, it was. And it probably was loud. Hockey was sort of more spread out because of the ice and everything. But you know what it was like? It was like the old Garden. I grew up in New York, and so I remember the old Garden on 8th Avenue fondly. It wasn't quite as loud because, there were so many gamblers downstairs, just making bets. It couldn't be that loud, behind the baskets. But you had that balcony overhang, where in those old arenas like the stadium, Chicago Stadium, and the old Madison Square Garden, where the upper deck hung right over the court. And so you had this incredible wall of sound, and, with Jordan and the Bulls and, what had become this phenomenon. And so... And you saw it more even in some of those Knicks series because it was so intense.
Oh.
That even though the Pistons-Bulls, was the signature rivalry for the Bulls, and the Knicks didn't win, so it couldn't have reached that
Even
level.
when they had the good teams, I mean, the Charles Smith series, as we call it, that series, they
Right.
thought they could win that year.
They should have won that year.
Yeah, and they could have. I mean, let's be honest, they could have. But you know what? They never could get over the top against them. It's funny. I thought they did a very good job of handling how painful the Detroit thing was for the Bulls, and I've always said that once the Bulls got past the Pistons, it was free sailing. I know everyone tries to make a big deal out of the first championship and the Lakers and everything, but I thought it was getting past. And once they grew up and got past, and to me, it was as much Pippen and Grant growing up as it was anything with Jordan, getting past those Pistons team. But I thought that, and Jordan, I think one line he threw away the other night was, hey, that meant as much to me as winning championships. I think it did. I thought beating the Pistons meant everything to them.
Yeah, you're exactly right, and Jordan had mentioned that, and that did, because that season, if you remember back, the NBA back then, the notion was always you had to go to the finals, sort of go through the wars and lose, and then before you win, like
Yep.
Boston and losing to the Lakers, Bird losing that first time, and then the Pistons losing, to the Lakers in the
Yep.
finals, and then Portland had been to the finals right before that with that great Portland team with Buck Williams and Drexler, Terry Porter, really deep team, Jerome Kersey, and they lose in the finals to Detroit, and now they start that 90-91 season 19-1. And so the Bulls are not thinking about it winning titles. I mean, really, nobody's talking about that. And I actually remember that season. We went into Detroit right before Christmas, and the Bulls got blown out, just lost by 25 or something. And Phil, after the game, was saying, "Hey, this team just might have it. We might have to change this team." And so they're on the verge of splitting apart. And all they can think of is getting by this Detroit team with, Pippen, obviously, Jordan, you could see 30 years later, he's still not sure about
the migraine game. Yep.
And so, and now the other thing, you're right. Jordan didn't trust still Pippen and Grant.
Right.
He was maneuvering with management to try to get them to trade those two guys for Walter Davis and Buck Williams, because those are ACC guys he liked. I need veterans. He was always screaming about, I need veterans. And so until Horace and Scotty stood up to that,
yep,
it didn't persuade him that they were capable of doing that.
I thought Sally's quote was perfect. The one time we finally knocked him down, he got up, went to the line, made the free throw, came down and dunked. We said, forget it. We're dust. It's over now. It's now we can't get in his head. Now it's over. Now
right.
Now we're physically done, and they were done. That was it.
Right, and those were the two elements. One, if they were going to stand up physically and not be complaining about it and not falling victim to it, and two, if Michael was going to trust them to play as a team, and then that element came up in Game 1 of the Eastern Conference Finals. Finally, this matchup now, they've lost in 6 in 1989. They lost in 7 in 1990. So now they got to win. They got to win in 91 or the Bulls are breaking up. They don't get past them now. And Game 1 and back in Chicago, first game in the conference finals, the Bulls take a lead and they get in the third quarter. Detroit comes back, and it's a similar pattern. Now they're within like 2 or 3 points. And Phil always rested Michael the first 3-4 minutes of the fourth quarter to keep him fresh for the end. And Phil was always underrated in how he understood players. Nobody was ever injured in that era. Phil really managed players well. He knew, the physical part of it. So Michael comes off the court. Phil always was consistent and changed, and all the reserves come on, and they extend the lead out to double digits. And Michael, after that game, made his famous comments, about my supporting cast. And that's when he finally started to accept that, hey, I don't have to do it all by myself. I got teammates. And when Detroit knew, once he accepted he had teammates, they weren't good enough to beat the Bulls.
Yeah, and when people forget, they make it seem like they remember now, like, oh, the Bulls were going to go right past the Lakers. You remember this. When the Lakers won Game 1, people were saying they were going to get swept.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I being with the team, when you're with a team, you often have a higher view of it than others. But I had predicted the Bulls to win that. We always make these stupid predictions, and we're usually wrong. But I picked the Bulls in 5. So I remember, like all of my nicely, but all the media guys were like taunting me on the way out. Okay, I see. You got your thing going. It was universal at the Lakers because they had Magic and they had the veterans. Sam Perkins and Worthy and veteran teams. They had the experience, and here were these young kids. But I had seen these guys play. That to me was always the best Bulls teams, the first two title teams, because you had the best defensive two-guard in history. You had the best defensive small forward in history. And at the time, you had the best athletic defensive power forward. So you had these three incredible defensive players all on the wings and the lanes. And it was just so difficult. And even you saw it, they showed it. Magic is dribbling the ball up backward. He can't get up the court.
No. He got exposed in that series.
Right, but that's not even if you've got Jordan, who's Defensive Player of the Year on him.
Yep.
So this team, I felt this team was really an incredible team that people were underestimating, and obviously they could have lost Game 3, which went into overtime. Stuff happens, but you could see it was a team ready to break through, and yeah, you're right. People were shocked that first year.
And the other thing that I thought that now maybe they'll go back to this, but they made a big deal in the first one, and I didn't see the first. I saw the second one this Sunday. I didn't see the first one this Sunday, so I saw 3 of the 4. They made a big part, and I've always been a big Pippen guy, and I defended him a lot because I thought people were too rough on him, and I thought he was very valuable. I think he would have been very valuable somewhere else too if he had been put in the right spot, But the bottom line is, they talked about the contract, which was an absurd contract. But what I remember being a big issue was not even so much the contract as to when Krause went and gave Kukoc all that money, which is what drove Pippen crazy, because Krause wanted to find his next star, right? That because he didn't draft Jordan, so he wanted to find that next guy, and he gave Kukoc a lot of money, which really ticked off a lot of guys and drove Scotty nuts on that team.
Well, yeah, it would have been an element of it, but I really have to defend Jerry on that because in this year, he did an incredible thing, scouting move because Kukoc was a great. He was
very good
really
offensively.
Sacrificed a lot with the Bulls. If Kukoc was the top player on a team, he'd have been like a 20-10 guy with 10 assists every game. He was like a Magic Johnson kind of player, 7-foot point guard and all that, and he played power forward for the Bulls because that's what they needed, and they had Scotty. But he went to Europe, and it was a sort of a bidding. He had to try to get this guy away from other teams at a time when the NBA was still pretty suspicious about overseas players, and so I think they had to financially make some sacrifices to do it, and so hey, look. What Krause was doing was to enhance the Bulls' championship, enhance the Bulls' possibilities to win. Scotty had his opportunities. I'm not that sympathetic, at what went on, because part of it, which they didn't really go into, was Scotty had back surgery after his first year. He had doubts that he would have a long career.
Right.
That's why I think he took the
And
long
he came
money.
from dirt poor, so he thought the money he had was a lot more than any he could dream about.
He also thought that, hey, I may only play a year or two, but I can get 8 years out of this.
Gotcha. Well, even the first Jordan contract wasn't a good contract, right? If I remember right, it wasn't the Jordan contract really paltry for a couple of years too? Yeah,
and see, that's the other thing too. Michael, when he came back in '95, he was finishing up an 8-year deal, and he came back those 2 months in '95. The famous 55 points in the Garden.
Right.
But then played the whole 95-96 season on that old contract where he was like, I don't know, the 80th highest paid player in the league or something. And I remember we'd ask him about that, and he'd say, hey, if they want to give me more money, that's fine. But he said, I signed a contract, and I have to play out my contract. When I play out my contract, I'm going to get my money. I'm not worried about that now. Now, he could say that, he had Nike and sneakers and all this sort of stuff. But he also set down the precedent with the team that you play out your contract. And so, Scotty was sort of hung out there a little bit.
What about the whole we all know the gambling stuff. Put the gambling in perspective, because I'm not a conspiracy guy in anything in life. And I'm not a conspiracy guy when it comes to Jordan. I don't think Jordan was run out of the league. I never believed that. I do know he was a crazy gambler, but he also had more money than anybody in the world too. So we know we like to gamble. Was the gambling in your mind ever destructive for that team?
Not at all. It's and I think they'll probably get into it. You remember the series in New York? I think it was that '93, the Charles Smith, which you referred to.
Yeah.
I think that was one of the ones where wasn't it Game 1 and Game 2 where Stark stunked on it at the end, and New York took that 2-0 lead. I think he went to Atlantic City between, maybe 1 and 2, 3 and 4, whatever it was.
That's when Dave Anderson wrote the story, right?
Yeah, Dave Anderson, of all guys, conservative. And,
well, he had a tip. Yeah, somebody called him. Yeah.
Michael went between games to Atlantic City. I remember it. So it became a big thing. The New York Times was, of all places, they were outraged about this. How could he do this? Let down his team. And I remember, someone asking me about that, and I said, he went to Atlantic City, got back, 2 in the morning. I said, I'm shocked. I can't believe it. He said, he never gets in before 5. I mean, so, and especially now, where all these leagues are in partnerships with all the gambling operations. And, I'm sure everybody, when they're in NCAA pools those years, they were declaring them on their taxes. I mean, it was just Michael's name. You know what? It didn't have to. It wasn't about the money ever with Michael. It was about the competition.
Yeah, and the action, right? Just like something to do, right?
It was just the action because that was.
He didn't sleep much, right? He didn't like to sleep much, right?
Yeah, he had. Yeah, I always said he had the nature of a hummingbird. He was constantly moving, and he always needed company around. There was always a game. I remember when I did this book a few years ago about the end of his career. I mean, sort of an oral history called "There Is No Next." And I talked to Magic about it, and we were talking about the Olympics. And he said, we'd play cards like all night. It'd be like 4 in the morning. And I said, hey, we got practice. I got to get up. Michael goes, come on, one more hand. He said, I can't. My eyes, I'm closed, and I can't stay up. I leave. He said, I find out before practice he played golf. And so, it was remarkable. He was going all the time, and was able. There was all, and these stories are true. I remember. Playoff series where in Miami, we get down finally out of all the bad weather, and it's April, which is still winter in Chicago, and he plays, 36, 45 holes of golf, and then goes and scores 48 points against the Heat. and this stuff was going on all the time with the guy, and so we got used to it. That's just who he is, and the action. Well, even when he was a rookie, because I remember Rod Higgins was his best friend. It was,
remember Rod Higgins? Sure,
and
absolutely.
He referred to all the drug users on that team, which was true. There were 6 players on that Bulls team that went into drug rehab from his rookie year, but that was what Jerry Krause was doing. He was breaking up that team, and it was essentially rebuilding with Michael Jordan, the front man, back then. So, Rod and him get friendly, and Rod's a really good ping pong player. So Michael bought a ping pong table and played ping pong all the time to practice so he could beat Rod. It was whatever you could compete at, and that's just that was what made him really the greatest in a sense because he just competed all the time. And when they say the cliche in sports, the coach always goes, we got to play 48 minutes, and we know nobody does. He did because he was looking to beat you on the first possession. And that's what elevates him among all these other players, that he had this incredible manic, probably sickness in part, drive to beat you all the time.
Never seen anything like it. Never seen anybody like it ever.
To do it, like
I think Tiger Woods came closest from what I'd seen recently. I think Jack Nicklaus might have been the same way, but Tiger Woods had that same ferocity. I've never seen any athlete have that more than Jordan had it. Jordan had it more than any player I ever saw. I mean, absolutely.
You're right about Tiger.
Yeah,
Tiger. And you see
very
what
much.
he did. He's probably the greatest golfer ever for that. I mean, that 10-year run is nothing we've ever seen before.
Sam, explain to the people if you can, and the ones that may not understand. I mean, they know Michael Jordan. They know the name. They know the legacy, the whole thing, the sneakers, the God, the whole thing. In the time when the Bulls were as big as they were and Jordan was as big as he was, how can you describe the biggest of how big Jordan was?
Well, I remember one time, I think it was 95 when he was coming back, which was President Clinton had mentioned in his press conference about jobs. He said the job rate is going up because Michael Jordan's about to come back to basketball, so that's part. And then I remember we were at practice, and Tom Brokaw was setting up there to do the evening news. And then one of the other reporters goes, I think this is big here tonight.
They
And
said
so
on the
this
network
is what it
news.
was. I
Yeah.
mean, this was way beyond anything we'd ever seen in basketball. This was not sports. I mean, these were national and international events. David Stern, always talked about, going to Asia and when they're starting in the international basketball, and they knew the Bulls. They didn't know any. They didn't know any other teams. They didn't know any of the players. They knew Jordan and they knew the Bulls, and that was it. So when he came back, probably after the gambling and everything and the baseball and the build up to the return and I'm back, he's probably the most famous person in the world at the time. It's extraordinary that a fairly simple basketball player, because that's what he was. He was just a kid who loved to play, who just wanted to compete and beat you on the basketball court. When he came to North Carolina, you saw, was it James Worthy had the great quote in this series about, I thought I was better than him for like 20 minutes or something. But even as a freshman, and you remember at the Hall of Fame speech where he was still mad at Dean Smith for not letting him get in the Sports Illustrated, cover picture because he was a freshman and they had that senior system there, upperclassman system. But he used to count in practice. He used to count the dunks, the times he dunked on Worthy or Perkins, and write it, on the board in the locker room to taunt him.
Well, you never heard a guy say, "I always picked out the best player on the team and went right at him on the court so I could prove that I was better than him right away." I mean, where do you ever hear anybody talk like that? You never hear that.
No, and you know what? There's a great one too. The second day of practice. And this is the old Angel Guardian. The Bulls are practicing in an old Catholic school back then with concrete floors when Jordan came. Can't imagine the level that franchise was. And so Kevin Lockery was the coach then, and he's back in the Bulls offices, which then had 12 employees in the total organization. And it's like before noon, and Rod Thorne, Rod told me this story. Rod asked him, "What are you doing back there?" Because he knew he had practice. And he said, this Jordan kid, every time he's on defense, he steals the ball from everybody. And every time he's on offense, he dunks on everybody. And he said everybody was getting so, depressed about what was going on. I had to stop practice. It got so out of hand.
And now, all these years later, how big are the Bulls still? I mean, this has probably rekindled some stuff, but how big is those teams? And not just Jordan, but how big is Jackson? And how big is Pippen? Especially those three, Jordan, Pippen, and Jackson. We know Jordan's on a different level, but how big is their legacy this many years later? I mean, I know if it's a Bulls game and they bring them out, it'll be like an old timers day, like it would be at Yankee Stadium if you brought out Mickey Mantle. But is it like that every time they see these guys, or what is it like now for these guys in Chicago?
Well, first of all, they're basically never here.
They're never there. Okay.
I don't think Jordan has been back in Chicago. I think
he doesn't spend any time in Chicago anymore at all.
Never.
Okay.
The first time I think the first time he's ever been to Chicago, basically since he retired, was in the All-Star game this year.
Gotcha.
And he didn't make a public appearance. He never came out. We were actually surprised. We know he doesn't. Until his documentary came out, we knew he wasn't doing anything in public, but. They have him in the All-Star game in Chicago, and, he has to walk out, to talk to anybody, just walk out, and the building is going to go berserk, and he didn't even do that. And Phil, Phil doesn't come here. He's Montana or L.A., and so we never see him. Scotty was on the payroll of the team
for a little while, right?
I think that's faded away.
Gotcha.
I think that stopped this year, and so there's always some ambivalence a little bit towards Scotty from some of the issues that have brought up over the years.
And they don't see Jordan doesn't ever come back for anything, right? He doesn't come back for.
He's never been back for anything.
Gotcha.
The only thing he came back for once is Johnny Kerr was dying, and they had a night for him, and he came back for that. That was the only time I can ever really remember him being in Chicago doing anything. Maybe he's had some Nike meetings, business meetings maybe, but. No, he's never.
And how big has this thing been in Chicago? This rekindling of this with this documentary, has it been that big a deal in Chicago?
Oh, yeah, it's been. I mean, and like you said before, partially the timing. Doing this,
Right.
during the virus, everybody's home, no sports, and then that made it even bigger, obviously. And ESPN, to their credit, recognized the opportunity. Because if this hadn't happened and it's going on in June after the finals, and you're talking baseball all week, and NFL, Bears is probably the number one sport in Chicago. So there'd be all this other stuff all week, and now with the lack of programming, sports talk radio is this, and the news station, our equivalent of whatever, WOO or WINS. I don't remember what's the news station in New York.
No, you're right. WINS is CBS also, but WINS is the one. 1010, is there?
Yeah,
WINS.
right.
Yeah, that one's still there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so it's been great for the Bulls because it's sort of
WINS shares a floor with the fan. As a matter of fact, they share a floor together.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, and it's with the Bulls having such a down period, and the community, and ended up they fired the GM, and they've got some new people, so they got some momentum, but they've kind of been able to hide behind all this acclaim for this great nostalgia about this great era that people. It's like you're going through history, and if you're at the Gettysburg Address, you weren't there, but I was there. You didn't think at the time that they're only quoting this 200 years later because it's like, it's raining and it's cold and, finish up, Abe, let's go. And it's sort of like that when it's day to day. You don't appreciate it as much as when you could look back on it.
Well, how about you reliving this? Because no one was listening. You were someone who had access to this guy. You were someone who actually had you had a role in this stuff. I mean, you really did. You were that close to this situation. You were there as this unfolded. You were there as this whole thing unfolded. So, I mean, what has it meant to you?
Well, it's as a lot of people realize, it's better to have good timing and good luck than anything else. And I just was fortunate to be at the right time at the right place. When I came up with the idea of writing the Jordan Rules, it was more of an exercise to see. I'd never written a book, and to say, hey, I know people who write books, and I know them. They're not so smart. I can do that. So let me give it a try. And the book that influenced me most was his book, David Halberstam, the great
sure.
fiction writer of the 20th century.
Absolutely.
The Breaks of the Game about
Absolutely.
the Portland Trailblazers in the late 70s.
Great book.
My book sold more, and his book was better written because he was David Halberstam, but he was writing about the Blazers.
Yeah, but your book was a big deal. Listen, the Jordan Rules has existed from that day forward.
Right.
So, I mean, the Jordan Rules is a big part of basketball.
Right, but he wrote about the Blazers when Bill Walton was injured. I had the good fortune to write about the Bulls when Michael Jordan exploded and the Bulls won a championship. So I happened to be at the right place at the right time, and it's been good fortune for me.
But that was
better fortune for them.
Yeah, that was a big deal, though. It really was. I mean, let's be honest. I mean, that whole relationship, that part of history in the NBA is a very big. It took. Magic and Bird breathed life and respectability back into that league, and then Jordan exploded the whole thing. That's exactly what happened.
Right, and that was right. It was, and David Stern always talked about that. Had coming in with Magic and Bird, sort of getting the NBA up on its feet again.
Yep.
And Michael taking the baton from those guys and Julius Erving, and just carrying it forward to this incredible future that the NBA has enjoyed. But clearly that was propelled by what Michael and the Bulls did in that era, and it's probably can't be repeated, and it won't be because of the dramatic cast of characters. Rodman, the most absurd player we've ever had, Phil Jackson, with the other elements of the Eastern philosophies and Native American traditions, and all the elements of Phil, which made him so unique. And I'm glad in that sense. He had such unfair period, I thought, with the Knicks, with the GM stuff.
I lived through a lot of that, Sam.
Right.
I can tell you.
And diminished his legacy.
It really
it
did.
With him as a coach.
It didn't, but I really, and I could be wrong, but what I saw was I don't think he had his heart in it. I really, and listen, they threw a ton of money at him, and they paid him a fortune. I mean, $50 million in a free apartment and everything else, and blah, 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 and a chauffeur, and he was at every event at the Garden and everything else, but I just never felt his heart was in it. I just never did. I think he was out of his element. I really thought that. I really felt that.
Well, he probably not negative toward Phil, but the Knicks were using him at his purposes. They needed a credible figure at the head of the organization because of what was going on. And I think Phil sort of, like any of us, saw an opportunity to try something he's never done. But as you know, with the Knicks, there's a lot of limitations and handcuffs, even if you're, quote, in charge. And so, that's a very Byzantine organization to try to work through.
I also think he was some guys are coaches, and I think he was probably a coach, and some guys probably aren't great general managers who are coaches. I don't know.
Right. And you know what? Michael Jordan may not be the best executive.
He's proved that, yes. I mean, he's clearly proved that, absolutely.
But it should never diminish who he was and what he accomplished. And I kind of felt like New York carried that over, wanted to diminish Phil beyond that because of what happened with the GM. And I'm glad to see in this people are seeing, not only how good, but how unique Phil was, and especially.
Yeah, I don't think one should affect the other. I really,
no.
I don't. And he was a bit of disappointment here, and I think it was an ugly era, but I don't think it diminishes 1 minute what he did with the Bulls, which was brilliant, absolutely brilliant. Is there anything misunderstood in your mind about Jordan? And now I know he's a complex guy. I know he's a guy who's very private, and he probably hasn't shown everybody in his life everything. But I mean, is there anything you ever noticed that you think was misunderstood about him?
I don't feel so much that, other than I think the sort of decency and humanity and just playfulness of who he was as a kid coming into the NBA, how much he wanted to enjoy it, and even that thing we talked about with Isaiah and the alleged freeze out. He really he even though he was already weeks into his career, he was a star. He really just wanted to be one of the guys when he got to the All-Star game, which I think bothered him, upset him that, I really, I respect Bird and I respect Magic and I respect Isaiah. And, I just want to be one of the guys too. And, sort of the economics separated him. So, I think people didn't get a chance to see him because they weren't paying attention in the 80s to who he was as we were, because the NBA was all about, Bird and Magic, and then the Knicks with Ewing, and in fact, I even remember when I proposed the Jordan rules, virtually every attempt I made to sell it, or the New York, I got letters of rejection from all these New York publishers saying, well, who's this? It's just some guy scores a lot of points. What's that? We're not interested in that. And so I think people, didn't get to see and sort of didn't know who Jordan was then. And then I think they didn't recognize the extent of this mania as a competitor, with the settling scores and grudges. And, he still mad at Jeff Van Gundy for implying that, he put guys in his movies to get under to win them over to their side. And so this incredible competitiveness and inability to forget anything that's happened. I think that's also this element of him that people don't see, that he's written down names in his mind, and he doesn't forget, as we saw, with Isaiah in that film already.
No, he keeps grudges. He holds them a long time. Absolutely, very close to the vest. No, there's no question. Well, listen, appreciate it. I hope you're doing well. I appreciate the time. Enjoy the rest of this. Thanks very much. I appreciate you coming on.
Great. Good to talk to you.
My pleasure. Thank you, Sam. All right. Sam Smith, the guy who, like I said, was closer to that team, wrote the Jordan rules, as you know, and, again, was the go-to guy for us. I can't tell you how many times, as Sam said, he would come on with us. We'd be courtside at the Garden. We'd be courtside in Chicago. And he would come on and spend a half hour with us or 45 minutes with us or whatever before a playoff game. And he'd have the lowdown on what was going on with the Bulls and what was going on with Phil or with Krause or with the player or with it, because he knew. I mean, he was around that team every day. And he, obviously was someone who chronicled every big day they ever had. And that's the guy I thought of, because I don't remember anybody who had the lowdown better than Sam did on the team. He really did. And he did it in a very, as you can tell, he didn't get too high, didn't get too low, didn't thrust himself into the middle of it, still looked at it as a reporter, and, watched this amazing era.
Radio, lights on, lights on. He'll get you the sports any way that he can. It's Mike Francesa on the Hits and 101.9 FM, WFAN.
All right, a little past 6 on this Wednesday night, the 29th day of April. Not a great day today. A little chilly, a little rainy. I went out and played golf today. It was dreary, but you know what? You want to get out and play, so, and you got to walk now. There's no carts, so you got to go out and walk. So we went out and walked today and played, but hey, it's better than not playing, so it's better than not sitting in the house. So it was dreary, cold, but hey, you can't have every day beautiful like it was yesterday. But we have reached the end of the month on this 29th day. We'll take you till 6:30. John and Susan will give you, I think this is game 4 tonight of the World Series, I believe, right? In game 4 tonight, that's the game the Yankees won 7-4, if I remember right, game 4 of the Phillies. It's funny, I was that series, the house I live in now, we were moving into the house. Well, we hadn't really moved in yet. As a matter of fact, we had sold our house, and we were rebuilding a house for like a year and a half. And we finally had to move out, and our house wasn't ready. So we rented a place a couple of towns down, and this was 2009, that fall. And I had little kids then. I had Harrison was still in a crib, and Jack and Em were like 3. It was 2009, so yeah, they were 3. They weren't even 4 years old yet. And we had 2 3-year-olds and a 1-year-old, and we were living in we had 2 bedrooms. We were jammed into places because we couldn't find anything nearby. We had a crib in our room. The twins were in the other room. And all we had was boxes and cartons and everything. And my wife said to me, listen, why don't you just stay in the city during the World Series? Don't even come home. Just stay in the series. Stay in the city during the World Series. So I stayed in the city during the World Series. And that was the Philly series. So we wound up moving into the house right around about a week before Christmas. We moved into the house that year. So I remember that well. And I still remember living in that crazy apartment while that series went on. And obviously what I remember about that series was, without any question, just the vindication of A-Rod in that whole playoff, because, here's a guy who had never hit, had never hit in the postseason, had never gotten the big hit for the Yankees, despite having brilliant seasons and MVP seasons and crazy good stats. I mean, some of A-Rod's years were mind-boggling, okay? Let's be honest. But that year, starting with the Twins, starting with the home run to right in the 9th inning in the Twins series, which turned the entire series around. I mean, that home run he hit into the camera in right field changed everything. Changes the whole postseason for the Yankees. And him having, a big hit that night, a record-breaking number of RBIs the whole series, 16 RBIs for the series, which is, I think, ties an all-time record for the postseason. He had 16 RBIs, and it wasn't a classic series. I mean, it was Johnny Damon had a lot of big moments, obviously, and that night in that game 4, Johnny Damon had a bunch of, had some very big hits in that game, and had a very big series, as you know, in that series. And if I remember right, game 4, I think Jabba won it, right? I think he got the win. I think, if I remember, because I like Jabba. He was a favorite of mine, so I'm pretty sure Jabba won that game. But hey, it's 10 years ago. I have to go look. But they'll have that game for you tonight. And I just saw that their guest is Mark Teixeira, who will be with them tonight. So that's coming up 6:30. Casamigos Tequila, as always, brings you the program, brought to you by those who drink it. As I told you earlier, every day there's a casualty. I've been asked a lot from fans and people I bumped into. Hey, Mike, I go to Saratoga every summer. What about it? And listen, Saratoga is a place that when people go, they go every year. And a lot of people visit Saratoga over the 6 weeks that it's open, or 8 weeks that it's open. Now it's open 8. It used to be open 6. In the old days, it was open 4. I've been going to Saratoga. The first time I went to Saratoga was 1978. As far as going there and staying, it was 1978. I've been there every year since. It was 1978 the first time I went. So I've been going there for more than 40 years, every year. I actually didn't go one summer out of my whole life. That was it in that time since 1978. Only one summer did I not stay in Saratoga for a period of time. And now, and I've been waiting for the governor. I did not see the governor's press conference today because I was playing golf, but I usually tried to watch it every day. But he had not taken any questions about Saratoga, and I think he'd been backing off waiting. And today, when I got back, I got a message, and they said, look at this. And I could tell from who it was by when I got the message, it was a negative Saratoga note. And the governor saying, hey, I don't see any way we can have crowds in Saratoga this summer. Saratoga gets massive crowds. I mean, this is a track that was, built in the 1870s, 1860s, 1870s that, is not built to house 60,000 people, which it gets on a summer, Saturday or Sunday. They jam them in there. So social distancing is not exactly part of the deal. It takes away a little of its charm. So now they'd already announced that there was going to be no horse sales in Saratoga. And I knew the reason for that because the sales are international. People come from Japan, the Middle East, Ireland to buy and trade and sell their horses. And they come, of course, from California and Kentucky and Florida and all over the country, from Virginia. Horsemen live in California. Horsemen live in Kentucky, of course. Horsemen live in Florida. They live in Maryland. They live in Virginia. So, and now even some live in Texas. So you had no sales, and now you have no fans. Now the question is, will they race in Saratoga in front of nobody for the TV cameras? There is a reason for that economically because, as I've explained to you, I think it might have been yesterday, it might have been the day before, that the simulcast of the Saratoga and the Signal to the other tracks is worth a fortune because there is upwards of $25 million bet each day on the Saratoga races because they're high quality. I mean, the Saratoga races are extremely good. You get the best horses there. Saratoga is the best of the best. It's like an all-star game every day. And, winning a race at Saratoga is like winning 5 races in downstate. That's how important it is. I mean, when you win a race in Saratoga, the next morning you'll go out to get the paper and 10 people will come up and congratulate you. And if it's someone like me who people know, I'll have to do 5 interviews with news cameras on the way out of the track that day about the race. That's just the way it is. I mean, that's part of Saratoga racing. There'll be a picture of me there in the winner's circle the next day, and there'll be a story on the horse, and that way for anybody who's well known there. I mean, that's the way Saratoga is, and that's part of the charm of the place. So I don't know whether or not they're going to have the racing there or not. We just don't know. See, we got to race the horses somewhere. If we don't race, you see, our horses are existing right now. Everybody's horses are existing. They're on farms. They're being trained, and they cost a lot of money. Even when, to give you an idea, when they're in training and they're at the track, their day rate is what they call a horse, which means his feed, his food, where he lives, not counting the vet. His day rate is about, on a top level, let's say a New York horse, his day rate's about a little over $100 a day. Might be 110 in Saratoga. Some guys might charge a couple extra dollars a day for ice. A couple of guys might charge a couple extra dollars a day for shoes. A couple of guys might charge a couple extra dollars but basically you're looking at a $100 to $110 day rate. If the horse is turned out somewhere else in the country, it's half that. So it's $55 a day. But the horse, no matter where he's living, is costing $55 a day. Times that by 7 horses or 10 horses. Now you have $500 a day, not counting shipping, not counting vet bills. You have those expenses every day for your horses. They need to race somewhere. Otherwise, it's not a very lucrative business. So those expenses don't go away. The horses are still eating, they're still living, they're still being trained, they're still being cared for. Every day those horses are still being taken out of the barn. They are jogging around a track somewhere. They are coming back in. They are being hosed down. They are being brushed. They are being cared for. They are being fed. They are having their legs iced. They are being treated like world-class athletes that they are every day. That's not changing. And so you need races somewhere to win purses to pay for all that. I mean, you can afford to handle it for a period of time, but nobody wants to do that forever. Now, there are people who have stables of, I have 7 horses. There are people who have hundreds. So it's an expensive proposition. So you need to have racing. You need to have purse money to be won. That's the idea. So, especially if you have good horses. Now, your horses are also getting older. So when you bring a horse into his 4-year-old year or his 3-year-old year, and now you're not getting anywhere to race him, the clock's ticking on these guys. The 3 and 4-year-old years are their big years. You need to race them in those years. So this is becoming an issue for horses, too, like it is for everybody else in every walk of life. So it's impacting everybody. And now we hear today that Saratoga is not opening, as far as fans. We don't know yet if it's going to be open for racing. That decision will not be made yet. And it means bringing a lot of horses to Saratoga. If you're wondering how many horses would be stabled at the track for the meet, about 2,000. And every one of those horses has to be cared for. And I mean cared for around the clock. So there's a lot of people who would be in the barns. And there's a lot of security that would be there. And that means there's a lot of people bringing in grain and bringing in hay and bringing in all kinds of equipment. And there's vets and there's vets assistants. And then there's people who have to hot walk the horses. Then there's people who have to bring the horses over to the track to race. Then there's got to be guys who put on the races. There's got to be racing officials. There have to be guys who put the horses in the gate. There's all kinds of things that have to go on. So there's still going to have to be a lot of people at the track, even if there's no fans at the track. And then you have to have the people putting on the TV, just like we're talking about for baseball. When you say baseball is not going to have any fans, it doesn't mean they're not going to have players, coaches, trainers, umpires, cameramen, announcers, official scorers, et cetera, and so on. Stadium operators, people to operate the scoreboards, people to operate the stadium maintenance, field guys, the ground crew. We go on and on. So when you still say there's, no fans, there's still a whole population of people who will be part of every one of these sports, and those people's lives have to be cared for. You have to make sure they're healthy. You have to make sure they've been tested. You have to make sure that the people that they're meeting keep them healthy. Not every announcer is 30 years old. There's plenty of announcers that are old. There's announcers that are decrepit. There's announcers that are really old. Hey, I'm 60. There's announcers that are 20 years older than me who are out there working. So the bottom line is there's a lot of people out there, and they all have to, they all have to be cared for. Now, the players are going to make sure they're cared for. That's part of their deal. They're not going anywhere till the testing's going to be ramped up. They're going to feel very comfortable about their physical well-being, or they won't even get involved. We know that. Their union will take care of that. But everybody has to be cared for, and everyone has to feel comfortable with their surroundings, with their work surroundings, with how they travel to the games, where they stay, how they're housed, and everything else. So there's a lot that goes into this, even after there's no fans involved. So that makes there be a lot of considerations for all this. See, what we're going to find, right now we spend every day trying to figure out how to reopen the country. What's right, what's wrong, what's scary, what's not. Are we healthier, are we not? Can we get tested? What happens if we get a resurge? Are there any drugs we can live with? Do we believe that Gilead has something here with this remdesivir, which today even Fauci got behind a little bit, which is why it took off and why the market took off. Market also took off because Google had a good earnings, and Apple and Amazon are up tomorrow. Microsoft was up today. I think it also had good earnings. So that's a big reason why the market's gone up. There's a lot to deal with here. And as you reopen each one of these industries, there's something to be considered in every step of this. Just like when you think about planes, trains, and automobiles, there's something to be thought about in every different. Everything has 5 things that connect to it. And everything has, and every industry, every walk of life, every event, everything we do has anywhere from 5 to 10 different layers of people who are involved in the production or in some way with the pre, post, or current part of that event. And that's just the way life is. So there's a lot to deal with in every walks of everything we think about has so many cause and effects that have to be dealt with. So when we consider sports reopening, there are so many things to consider. When we consider when we're going to race at Saratoga or not have the racing with no fans, there's so many things to consider. Even when you consider whether or not you're going to open up, I'm sure there's a lot of discussions in beach towns. Okay, I grew up in a beach town. I'm from Long Beach. We used to go from, our population used to quadruple in the summertime. Just like it does out in the Hamptons, just like it does Jersey Shore, just like it does all over, people flock to these places. Are those beaches going to be open? Are those beaches going to be safe? I'm not just talking about the beach that might be private where you know everybody. Those beaches can open. I mean, they know each other. The people know each other. They live on the same blocks. They can get to the beach and they can comfortably distance themselves and hang out. They all know each other anyway. I'm talking about the big beaches. I'm talking about the places like Jones Beach. I'm talking about the places like Hamptons and Montauk and places where you have people flock. Can there be any flocking to these beaches? Is that humanly possible 3.5 weeks from now? The governor of New York just told you it isn't possible to have people descend on Saratoga in late July or August. Who's going to be descending on some beach town in May? Every bus, every subway, every night? Sure, why not? Okay, yeah, this stuff's easy to do. Just like it's going to be easy to socially, you're going to socially distance everybody and still get them to New York City every morning. What are you out of your mind? This stuff is not possible, folks. It's not humanly possible. There are things you have to be honest about it as a government official and say, hey, we can't open New York City and keep everybody 6 feet apart. It's not humanly possible. It's not possible. It cannot be done. Can't give you each your own subway car. It cannot happen. Just like they're going to disinfect every subway car every day. No, they're not. Really? They have no money as it is now. They're completely broke. They're completely broke. So how are they going to do that? And, they act like they have money, that they have an endless supply of money. Somebody said to me today, get ready for some bonds. If you're in the market for bonds, maybe bonds that are triple tax free, get ready. They may be coming because the federal government's not going to bankroll all this stuff. So they tell states, hey, go out there, sell some bonds. So be looking for some 8-9% triple tax-free deals, which are not bad. That's like 12%. So if they want to send some 8-9% triple tax-free our way, I'm definitely interested. So and I'm sure plenty of other people are too. So but it could come to that. It really could, because they're going to be in need of so much money. It is unbelievable. A couple of things. Number one, they canceled the Hall of Fame this year. That includes Derek Jeter, Larry Walker. So that's next year, to the surprise of nobody. Folks, they're not going to have events like the Hall of Fame this year. It's not happening. They're not having Saratoga. They're not having the Hall of Fame. They're not having any event where you have to congregate. It's not happening this year. You're not going to be congregating anywhere until there is a drug that you can ingest that keeps you healthy. Until then, there's not going to be any massive congregating of any kind. That's the bottom line. Okay? But I want to see how they have New York City up and operational and tell you that they're going to socially distance. They can't do it. It cannot be done. Number two, I'm sure it broke Favre's heart to get into the Packer thing today by saying that he envisions Rodgers heading to another team and finishing his career on another team, that they burned the bridge. They did burn the bridge. Let's be honest. He probably will finish with another team. Well, most quarterbacks do. Tom Brady's finishing with another team. So the idea that Rodgers would finish with another team should not shock anybody. It really shouldn't. Did they decide to move everything and change the equation? They did. They did. They changed his place. His standing with the squad was changed by the new hierarchy. They said, this is our Packers, not your Packers. That's what they did. They said, listen, you've had a great career, but these are not your Packers anymore. They're our Packers. Your clock's ticking. Cold? Yeah, but that's just the way it is. And you saw or heard or will read about the first part of what will begin to be the end of college athletics in America as you know them. The NCAA has no choice, can't do anything about it. The NCAA allowing players to be paid for their likeness, for their autographs. So you can be at school X and you can be the quarterback and you can go down to Joe's bookstore and you can sign autographs and get paid. Now, the school can't pay you directly. What's that worth? Zero. What does this do? It makes it much easier for the cheaters to cheat, is what it does. It gives them a complete license to steal. What you did is just give the bank robbers the keys to the vault, is what you did. There was no way around it. But what it means is now they have 50 ways to funnel money to players at that school. A gazillion ways that they can't get caught. So now, now the only question is how much? How high is high? Depends how good the player is. The beginning of the end, as you know it. Casamigos Tequila, brought to you by those who drink it, brings you the program. Susan and John have Yankees, Phillies, game 4. You know it'll be a happy ending. It's always a happy ending.